Now you can see when I grab a card and move it, the color of the droppable element around the outside will go white when it's selected. So if I move it over to in progress, you'll see that that drop area goes white. I can then drop that within that area, and automatically that'll update the list that this card sits within. Hello, my name is Lachlan, and today I'll be teaching you how to build a Trello clone entirely out of no code using Bubble. Bubble's by far one of my favorite no-code tools, as it gives you complete control over your own custom database and also a visual editor that allows you to easily drag and drop powerful elements. For those of you who don't know me, I've spent the last year working with the Bubble team to write their how-to blog series. This series took a list of the top products out there on the market, such as Airbnb, Uber, and Spotify, and broke down the step-by-step process to recreating them with Bubble. While these written tutorials were helpful to makers all across the world, I had plenty of requests to go out on my own and recreate them as a video series. Throughout this tutorial, I'll be explaining the step-by-step process to recreate your own project management tool like Trello. This will include features like creating user accounts, creating new Trello boards, creating lists within those boards and tasks within those lists, and then being able to drag and drop those tasks between lists. And finally, being able to edit the content that displays on each card. So grab your Bubble editor and follow along as we build our Trello clone together. Okay, so the first thing we're actually going to do in this product is create our database. Now, if you want to follow along with the Notion template I've created here, I've given an outline as to what data types and fields you should have when creating a Trello clone. So we'll head over to our database now, and we'll start creating our new inputs. Now, under the user field, Bubble already gives this to you with a pre-built email field as well, so you won't need to worry about that. We will need to, though, add a name and a profile image, and then also associate these with a list of boards that the user will join. So the best way to do this in Bubble is to start by building the data types itself. So we'll have a user, a board, a list, and a task. So I'll add those in now. So we've got our users there. We'll have a board, list, task. And now we can go and create our data fields within these, and we'll need to link these. So that was the reason why we had to create our data types first. So in our user field, we'll create a name field. That'll be a text type. We'll create a profile image field, which will be an image type. And then we'll want to create a list of boards joined. And this field will link to our board's data type. And because a user can join more than one board at a time, we'll want to make this a list of multiple entries. Then we'll head over to our board type and add in the fields from our Notion template here. So there'll be a board title, a featured image, and then a list of lists. So we'll create a title. Again, that's the name of the Trello board, so it'll be text, a featured image, which will be an image, and then a list. So I refer to lists as columns in Trello. So we will create a list. This will be a list property, and again, there'll be multiple columns or lists within a Trello board, so we'll tick that there's multiple entries. And then for our list property, this one's pretty straightforward, but I will explain this later on in our build. So for the list itself, we'll just need a name, which of course will be another text input. Now, the reason that the list property doesn't have many data fields is because all of the content will be hosted on the task itself, and we can link that back to the list that it's in. So if we go to our task data type, we can see that we're going to need to add a name text field, a description, which is another text field. And what else was there? There was an image, so that'll be the featured image for that particular card. We'll make that an image field. And then we'll also need a list field. Now, this will determine which current list or column this card will be featured in, because in Trello, of course, you can drag tasks between lists. So we'll write this as current list. And this will be a single list because a card will not want to be in multiple lists at once. We'll only want it in a single list. Perfect. And just like that, we've created everything we'll need for our initial database. And now we're ready to build the first feature of our Trello product, which is the function to create a new Trello board. So if we head over to our editor, we can create a new page, and we'll call this page our dashboard. I will make that page a little bigger. You can also find the constraints of the device that you're building for. In this case, I'm just going to use a rough estimate. I also personally like to just change the background color to a light gray, so if I'm adding any white elements, I can see where my borders are. Now on this page, what we're going to want to do is create a function to obviously create a new board and then display those boards on that home page. So what we'll first do is just add a title here. So it's boards. I'll just choose a generic styling for that. Go H1, make that a bit bigger. Now over in our top right hand corner, we will select to add a icon. We'll want this to be a plus icon. And we will just update the color of that. You can create new styles. I'm just going to update the default one. And then I'll just add some text next to it to create board. Again, I'm just going to select a fairly generic text option, and you can see that our homepage is starting to come together. Now, what we're going to want to do is then also add a pop-up element to this page, and this will be the pop-up to create a new board. So when essentially someone clicks the create button, this pop-up will display, and then we'll add some input fields onto this pop-up. This one will be the input field to give a title to the board. And then we will add a picture uploader as well. And this will be the way that a user can add a featured image to our board. We'll just reduce the size of this pop-up. You can center these horizontally. And now I will just add some text. This will be board title. Again, I'll just be choosing a standard text style. On a board image. Move that up. Now this is very rough, but you can definitely take the time to design this properly. I'll add a button down here, and I will just grab the same color code from my create button. A pop-up will be hidden under your elements tree here because it's not always an item that's going to be displayed. It'll only be displayed when you choose to show it. I'll make the primary button color the same as our blue. And the text of this should be to create board. Now, what we'll need to do is create a workflow to trigger that pop-up. So over on our create button, we will start a workflow. When our icon is clicked, we will then need to go over to element actions and show an element. And then we'll want to show our create pop-up element. Next, on our pop-up itself, we will create another workflow on our create board button. So when it's clicked, we will want to create a new board itself. So head over to our database items, create a new thing. The new thing we'll want to create is a board. Then we'll match the on-page input fields with the data fields in our database. So we will allocate the title of the board to match the input field of our title, its value. Then we will get the featured image and use that value of our picture uploader. Now, when that workflow runs, a new board will be created, but there's one other thing we'll need to do for this board, and that is add the current user who is creating this to that board itself. So we will go over to our data again. This time we'll be making changes to a thing. The thing we'll want to change is the current user, and we'll want to go to their data field called boards joined. We want to add the result of the step 1. So that is the new board that has been created. So now when this workflow runs, a user will create a board and join that board as well. Back in our Notion doc, we can then check off that we've created a new board. And the next feature we're going to work on is a little bit of a side step. We're going to want to register user accounts. Now, the reason I've added this after the function of creating a new board is because there might be a situation where a user isn't logged in and they click this button here to create a board, or perhaps you don't want to display this to a user who isn't logged in. In the case that someone who doesn't have an account decides to click on this button, you don't want them to have a functionality to create a board. You'll want them to create an account first. So the beauty of Bubble, and one of my favorite features, is that it is super streamlined in handling the onboarding process for registering user accounts for you. So if you use their reusable elements, you can head over to the sign up login pop-up. Now what this will do is it provides you with a pop-up form to essentially create a user account without you having to worry about a thing. Now the best thing about this pop-up is because it's a reusable element, Bubble has already pre-built all of the workflows you need to create a user's account or throw up a forgotten password message. So if you head over to your menu here and go over to this reusable element, it'll take you to the element itself separately. And if you go over to the workflow tab, you'll see all of the existing workflows that can run with this. And you can modify these or delete these if you don't want them. But for instance, here is a workflow that shows you your forgotten password. When a user clicks the login button, it'll log them in, then hide the pop-up. If they're new, it'll sign them up and then hide the pop-up. So it'll already take care of registering an account for you. The only thing we'll need to do back on our homepage is create a workflow that triggers the pop-up when a user isn't logged in. Now we can do this by adding conditions to our workflow. So when our element is clicked and the element is the icon to create a new board, we'll select to only run this workflow when the current user isn't logged in. Then what we'll want to do within this workflow is go over to our element actions. We'll want to show them the sign up pop-up. And what we'll then also need to do is head over to our previous workflow that we created and add a condition to this workflow to only run when the current user is logged in. So now this icon will register between the two and show the correct pop-up based on a user's current registration status. Once we've ticked off this feature, we can then focus on displaying our boards on our dashboard page. And this will be possible with the power of repeating groups. So repeating groups are one of my favorite elements within Bubble. What they allow you to do is add custom content into the first grid, and then it will replicate it across the rest of the grids, and it'll populate those with content from your database. So think of this like a social media feed in that these are all status updates. It might have text, it might have an image, but these are all going to be different based on content that suits someone's preferences. So the first thing we'll need to do when we've added a repeating group is choose the type of content that it's going to display. In this case, it's going to be a board because we're going to want to display a list of boards to our current user who's logged in. And we're going to want to display boards where the current user has joined those boards. Then after that, we will modify the styling of our grid and we can change that to, let's say, 2 and 3. Now, the repeating groups will continually scroll down if you've added more items than the 6 that are in here. And now we can start adding the content that will go in this. The first element we'll add is an image, and this image will be the cover photo for the board itself. So we'll need to update this as a dynamic element because all boards will have different featured images. So we'll want to make this the current sales board featured image. Then we'll head over and grab a text element and we'll actually overlay this over the image element. And we'll want this to display the current sales board's title. And I will just update the styling of that. Move that to down there. Perfect. Now on our dashboard page, once a user has created the board or perhaps they've joined a board, it will display a list of all of the boards that they are associated with. and then they can essentially click on that, and that will redirect them over to the board page itself. Now we can tick off that we have displayed a list of all of the boards in our app. And what we'll need to do now is create an individual page to display the content of the board itself. So we will head over to our menu, we'll create a new page, and we'll call this a board. And the first thing we'll need to do here is, because we want to display the content of a board or a project, we'll need to update the type of content that the page displays. So in this case, it will be a board. Then we're going to take a step back and go to our dashboard page, and we're going to want to create a workflow when a board's image is clicked. So this workflow will essentially redirect a user to the board page once they've clicked this item. So when this is clicked, we'll head over to our navigation event. We will select Go To page, and the destination page in this instance will be our board page. And we're going to want to send some data with this, because we're going to want to send the data of the current board that is being clicked, so the current sales board. Now, whenever a user selects that image, it'll send with it all of the data, so like the existing tasks or users within this board, over to that page. Now on our board page, we can start adding all of the content to make this functional. So the first thing I'm going to want to do is add a title that is the current board page title, just so you can track the project that you're working on. I'll make this heading a little bigger. And then I'm going to want to add another repeating group element, because this is what's going to display all of the tasks or cards within a board. So what I'm going to want to do then is also change the layout style of the repeating group to be a horizontal scrolling. And as you can see right now, it only has one column, but if I add 3 columns, you'll start to see it's looking a lot like a Trello board. Then similar to last time, we're going to want to add a content type for this repeating group, which will be a list. And then we're going to want to decide which particular lists we'll be wanting to display on this board page. So we'll need to grab the list from the current board pages, lists. Now, after we've configured our repeating group, we're going to create a feature to add a new column/list to the actual repeating group itself. So let's grab another input field, add that there, and then we will grab a button and we'll add new list as the action here for that. So someone can add a list title, we'll call this, and we'll create a new workflow when the new list button is clicked. And the thing we'll want to do is create a new list. So head over to the data column, create a new thing, select list, and the name of the list, which is the only field, will be the value of the input list title that we just added. Then after creating the list itself, we'll also need to add this list to the board. So that way the board knows which lists belong to it and which lists it should display. So we'll head over to our data field, we'll make changes to a thing. The thing we'll want to change is our current page board that we're on. And then we'll want to update the field, which is the lists, and we'll add the result of step 1, which is the new list that we created. Now, every time that's clicked, a list will be added in chronological order. So next we'll want to add some dynamic content into this repeating group. The first thing we'll do is just add the title of the list. So the current sales list name, make that over there. We'll just change the style of that to also be a H2. So I just want to reiterate where we are up to at this point. So on our dashboard page, we can head over and actually create a board itself. So I'm just going to call this a test board. I'll add an image to this board, and then I'll create the board itself. And I haven't changed anything formatting wise yet, and the image isn't the full size of that row. But you can see that the title is there and the image is there, and you'll also be able to see that I can click through, and that will take us to the board page, the test board there. And then over here, what we'll want to do is create a new list, because there's nothing in our repeating group yet. So I'll call this backlog. Create list, and you'll see that our backlog column is there. We'll make the next one in progress. You can start to see these are coming along nicely. The last one I'll do is just called complete. And there we have it. Our board is coming along nicely. So back on our Notion board, we'll check off on the features list that we've created the board page. We've also added the feature to create and display lists within our board. And the next thing we'll actually be doing is adding a task within the list. Now, between this and being able to move tasks between the lists, this is where things can start to get a little complex, so you'll want to follow along carefully. When we're adding our task within our column or list repeating group, we're going to need to do so with a plugin first called draggable elements. The first thing we'll need to add is a drop area element, and what this means is that this is an area where cards can land on between the rows that we have. Now, what I'm going to do to help illustrate the drag and drop elements is just change the color of this to be a black background, and we will update this later. We'll also need to add a content type for this, which would be a list, and then it'll also need to display the current cells list. Once our drop area has been added here, what we'll need to do is actually add a repeating group element. Now, the reason I'm adding a repeating group within this drop element is because within this one column, you'll want to add a list of multiple cards. So you can picture almost these grids being each individual task or card that you have within a particular column. So we'll go ahead and change the type of content of this repeating group to be a task, and then we'll need to search for all of the tasks where the current list equals the parent group's list. Now, because this repeating group sits within the actual drop area itself, and we configure this drop area to be a list, it's now going to pull all of the existing cards that are within this list. Finally, the other thing we'll do is I'm going to make this a one row, one column repeating group. So although it might not look like a repeating group, it might just look like a normal group because you can't see the grids in between. Rest assured that it will allow you to store multiple items within here. Then to help you separate the repeating group from the group, I'm just personally going to create a new style for this repeating group so I can change the color of it. So I'm going to call this task repeating group. And I'm just going to change the background color of this to be blue. So you can now see the repeating group within the draggable element itself. The last thing we'll need to do to actually show the cards themselves is add a draggable element within our repeating group. Now this element is another group, so I'm just going to change the background color of this. I'll just keep it white in this instance. And this will actually contain the content of a card itself. Now, as always, we'll need to update the type of content. This will be a task, and the data source for this particular task will be the current cells task. Then within the task, we're going to need to add the name of the task. So we'll pull the dynamic content from the parent group's task, and we'll want to display its name. And I'm just going to update that to be a H2 text style. And the parent group, of course, is our card/task here. Then head over to our image, and we will add this to be the parent group's task image. So if there's a featured image, that will display, and if not, it will just collapse instead. So you can see our cards are coming along nicely. The last thing we'll need to do is create a function to actually create a new card, because we can display them at the moment, but we're going to want to create new items within our column or repeating group. We'll grab a text input element, and we'll just make this the same width as the group here, and we'll call this input create task. One thing you'll notice within Trello is that once you've added the task name, it'll automatically just add that card. There's no button like we had for our list. And this feature is actually really easy to replicate in Bubble. So what we'll need to do is head over to our workflow editor and create a new workflow when an input value is changed. Now, of course, the input we're going to use is the create task input. So it'll now register whenever text is added into that, and let's say a user clicks away or hits enter, that value has been changed. The thing we'll want to do then is create a new thing. the thing we'll want to create is a task. And we'll just start by keeping it simple by giving a name to this task. And the name will be the value of the input field that we've just added. Then after we've given a name to our task, we'll need to add this task within a list or column, as I'd call it, itself. So we will select the current list option, and we'll want to make that the current cells list that it sits within. So now whenever a input is added here, it will create a new card and add it to the list that we've selected in. So let's head over to our development environment and check that out. I'm going to create just a test card here. I will hit enter on that, and you can now see that our card has been created within the column that I wanted to create that in. Another quick feature that you could add here is to reset this input value so that the word test just doesn't sit around there. And the easy way to do that is just head back over to our workflow where we're creating a new task, and we'll add another step under element actions to reset inputs. And that will reset the input that we've just used. So if I now refresh the development page that we're working on, I'm going to call this card test2. I'll hit enter, and you can start to see that the repeating group is scrolling down. And right away, you'll notice that two things have happened. First of all, the input field has reset, which is exactly what we wanted, but you can't actually notice the new card that we've created. And the reason that's happening is because we haven't configured our repeating group to use extended vertical scrolling yet. So if I scroll down within the repeating group, the card is there, as you can see. But what we'll need to do is go back to our bubble editor and just change the layout style of the repeating group to be extended vertical scrolling. Now what that'll do, if I reset this page, is create an extended list of all the cards. So I can continue to just add as many cards as I want, and it'll add them within this list or column. Now back on our Notion page, we can tick off that we have created a new task and display those in a list. And that is all I have time for in this tutorial today. If you wanted to check out the rest of the course, I'd recommend clicking the link in the description below and purchasing the full course. Throughout this, I'll be walking you through the step-by-step instructions to complete the rest of our build. You can also get access to a suite of Bubble tutorials where you'll learn how to rebuild other popular products. If you'd like to also get started learning how to build some other popular products, I'll include some suggested videos in a moment that you can also check out. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to hit that subscribe button if you'd like to see any more helpful tutorials like this to help you on your Bubble journey.